I always believed in following the rules until the rules turned against me. One morning, a letter arrived, a $10,000 fine for having too many cars in my own driveway. At first, I laughed, thinking it was a mistake. But as more notices came, I realized this wasn't about rules. It was personal. I always played by the rules. I paid my HOA dues without complaint, kept my lawn in perfect condition, and never caused trouble. But none of that mattered to Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. She thrived on control, wielding fines like weapons, and one day I became her target. A crisp white notice was taped to my door. $10,000 fine for excessive vehicles in the driveway. I stood there reading it over and over. My cars were legally registered, neatly parked, and well within my property lines. But logic didn't matter. Karen had made up her mind. I was a problem that needed to be dealt with. Most people would have pleaded, argued, maybe even caved under the pressure. But I saw things differently. Karen thought she held all the power, but she had no idea I was already steps ahead. I wasn't just going to fight back, and I was going to take everything. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Karen was just being overzealous, flexing her authority in a way that was more annoying than malicious. So I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I reached out to the HOA board. I drafted a polite email, citing the community guidelines, explaining that all my vehicles were properly registered and parked within my own property. I even referenced other homeowners with similar setups who had never received a single complaint. I hit send, expecting at least some level of professionalism. Instead, I got another notice. This time, it wasn't just the $10,000 fine. Karen had apparently taken a personal interest in my property, and the violations started rolling in. First, it was my mailbox. According to the HOA, the color was too dark and didn't meet the approved shade list. Never mind that I had never been given a shade list, or that half the homes on my street had identical mailboxes. Fine, $500. Then it was my lawn. Exceeds the maximum allowable height by half an inch, the violation stated. I ran my hand through the freshly cut grass and shook my head. Fine, $250. Next, the parking rules changed. Just for me. I started hearing from my neighbors, confused and concerned, because they had received warning letters about unauthorized vehicles parked too close to a particular property. That property was mine. Karen was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me, making me out to be some kind of repeat offender, a nuisance who refused to follow the rules. And then it got worse. One night, I saw movement outside my window. At first, I thought it was a passing car, maybe someone out for a late-night walk. But then I saw them, two figures standing just beyond my driveway, their silhouettes barely visible under the dim glow of a street lamp. I watched as one of them lifted a phone, snapped a picture, and then whispered something to the other before walking off into the night. The next morning, another violation arrived. I had been spied on. They were watching me, waiting for the smallest excuse to slap me with another fine. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was hunting for any reason to bury me in violations. I could have fought back the normal way. I could have hired a lawyer, attended every HOA meeting, demanded a fair hearing. But something told me that no amount of reasoning or legal posturing would stop Karen. She wasn't playing fair, and neither could I. So I made a decision. While Karen was busy measuring the height of my grass and dictating the shade of my mailbox, I had been quietly working on something bigger. I had been buying up properties in the neighborhood, one by one, house by house. Some were investments, some were for rental income, but all of them had something in common. They gave me voting power within the HOA. And as of last week, I had officially acquired 67% of the neighborhood. Karen thought she was untouchable, that she could find me into submission, make me bow to her authority, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just another homeowner fighting a petty battle. I was her worst nightmare. Because now, I didn't just live in this neighborhood, I owned it. The day had finally come. For weeks, I had been playing the long game, watching as Karen tightened her grip on the neighborhood, using fines and intimidation to keep everyone in line. But while she was busy abusing her authority, I had been quietly collecting something far more powerful than violation notices. I had been acquiring ownership, and now I had the document to prove it. It arrived that morning, neatly stamped and notarized, the final confirmation that I had secured 67% of the neighborhood's properties. It meant that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the majority stakeholder in the HOA. Karen had spent months treating me like an outsider, a problem she needed to squash. But what she failed to realize was that this fight had never been about a driveway or a mailbox color. It was about control. And now I was the one holding all the power. That evening, I walked into the HOA meeting with a stack of property deeds under my arm. The board had gathered in the clubhouse as usual, seated around their long oak table like a self-important tribunal. Karen sat at the center, her fingers drumming against the table, already wearing the smug, condescending expression I had come to despise. She thought she had already won. She had no idea. I didn't sit. I didn't even wait for the meeting to begin. I walked straight to the front of the room and slammed the stack of deeds onto the table. Papers scattered, the sound echoing through the room like a gavel striking judgment. Karen flinched. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, defensive. I took my time, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Then I leaned forward, staring her down. "You've been fining me for my driveway? Well, guess what?" I slid a single sheet of paper toward her. "I own your house now." The room went dead silent. For the first time since this war began, I saw something new in Karen's eyes. Fear. She snatched up the paper, scanning it with growing horror. It was all there, clear as day. The previous owner of her house, struggling under the weight of rising HOA fees and constant fines, had sold it to me last week. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned to the rest of the board. "And not just hers. As of today, I own 67% of the properties in this neighborhood. That means I now have the controlling vote over this." HOA murmurs rippled through the room. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing what this meant. Karen finally found her voice. This is illegal. You can't just take over the HOA like this." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Karen, you of all people should know how the rules work. The HOA bylaws state that the majority stakeholder has final decision-making authority. And since I now own the majority of this neighborhood," I picked up the gavel sitting on the table and tapped it twice. "I call for an immediate vote to remove the current HOA board." Karen shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" One by one, the board members raised their hands. They weren't loyal to Karen. They were loyal to whoever had the power. And in this room, in this entire neighborhood, that was now me. The votes were counted in seconds. It was unanimous. Karen's reign was over. She stood there shaking, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You have no idea what you're doing." I smiled. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. And the first thing I'm going to do?" I held up my own HOA violation notice, the one she had personally issued for my driveway. "I'm erasing every ridiculous fine you've ever given." The room erupted in applause. Karen stumbled back, speechless, as the reality of her downfall set in. For months, she had made my life, and the lives of so many others, miserable. She had fined, harassed, and controlled with an iron fist. But now the tables had turned. And the best part? This was only the beginning. Karen's face twisted with rage. She wasn't used to losing. For years, she had ruled this neighborhood like a queen, issuing fines at will, using her position to bully and control. But now, as the final votes were counted, her power slipped through her fingers like sand. "This isn't legal," she screeched, slamming her fists on the table. "You can't just walk in here and take over." I leaned back, arms crossed, watching as she unraveled. "Actually, Karen, I can. The HOA bylaws are crystal clear. Majority ownership grants voting control. And I own the majority, meaning ... I gestured toward the board members, now looking anywhere but at her. "I just voted you out." The reality hit her like a freight train. Her lips parted, searching for a rebuttal, some loophole, some way to claw back the authority she had wielded so ruthlessly. But there was nothing. A slow grin spread across my face. "Oh, and one more thing." I reached into my folder and pulled out the violation notice. The one that started it all. The absurd $10,000 fine for my perfectly legal driveway. I held it up for the entire room to see before tearing it in half. Effective immediately, every single bogus fine you've issued is void. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. People had been waiting for this moment. A few homeowners in the back actually cheered. Karen's face darkened. You don't have the right. I cut her off. I have every right. You see, Karen, while you were too busy measuring grass height and picking fights over mailbox colors, I was doing my homework. I know every rule, every loophole, every technicality. And you broke plenty of them yourself. She froze. I let that sink in. You've been using HOA funds for personal expenses, haven't you? I asked, cocking my head. That little kitchen renovation? The business lunches that were really spa days? Oh, and let's not forget the time you forgot to submit financial reports for the last 3 quarters. The color drained from her face. The room fell silent. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew. Maybe they hadn't spoken up before, but now that she was exposed, none of them were going to defend her. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear. You really should have read the fine print before coming after me, Karen. She opened her mouth, maybe to deny it, maybe to beg, but I didn't care anymore. I turned to the crowd, my voice ringing with finality. Effective immediately, I'm implementing a full audit of HOA finances. If anyone's been misusing funds, we'll find out. And if any homeowners were wrongly fined, they'll be getting their money back. The room exploded into applause. People were shaking my hand, clapping me on the back, grinning like they had just been released from prison. For years, Karen had ruled with intimidation, scaring homeowners into silence, making them believe they had no choice but to obey. But tonight, that era ended. Justice had been served. As for Karen, she stood there, fists clenched, eyes wild with desperation. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to deny everything. But there was nothing left to say. The people she once controlled were now free, and I made sure she knew it. You should probably start packing, I said, my voice calm, almost amused. You're no longer welcome in my neighborhood. With that, I turned and walked out of the meeting, leaving Karen standing in the wreckage of her ruined empire. The neighborhood was finally ours again, and I had a feeling it was about to get a whole lot better. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. The ridiculous fines disappeared overnight, and for the first time in years, people weren't living in fear of stepping an inch out of line. No more late-night surveillance, no more threats over mailbox colors, just a fair, reasonable HOA that actually worked for the community, not against it. I should have felt victorious. I should have been able to sit back and enjoy the peace I had fought so hard for. But then the letter arrived. It was crisp, official-looking, with a law firm's name stamped across the top. Karen wasn't done. She had one last move, one final attempt to take back the power she had lost. And from the looks of it, she was willing to play even dirtier than before. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. Want to know what happened next? Drop a comment below with your worst HOA horror story. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe what happened next.